Hey guys, tonight we're exploring one of history's most overhyped nightmares, the Victorian wedding night. Not the candlelit, rose-petal fantasy your grandmother pretended happened. I'm talking about the real experience. Awkward, confusing, shrouded in more mystery than your neighbor's Wi-Fi password, and about as relaxing as trying to assemble IKEA furniture with your in-laws watching. Before we dig in, take a second to like, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment about the weirdest wedding story you've ever heard. But only if you actually enjoy this kind of bedtime brain sabotage. Now, go ahead, dim the lights, set your phone to Do Not Disturb, and put on that fan for some white noise. Get comfortable, because tonight's journey is full of frills, frights, and an absolutely unhealthy amount of taffeta. Have you ever wondered, what did Victorian women actually expect on their wedding night? Did anyone explain what was supposed to happen? Or was it just a lot of awkward staring and possibly fainting? Why did so many etiquette books say, "Don't worry, just lie back and think of England"? What did a wedding dress smell like after 12 hours of sweating in it? Were Victorian husbands any better prepared? Or were they also just guessing and hoping not to faint from anxiety? And most importantly, how do you recover when your first romantic experience involves a chamber pot and your mother-in-law lurking in the hallway? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1871 and it's your wedding night. The corset is too tight. Your mother has given you a cryptic warning about marital duties, and the only person who seems to know what's going on is the family dog. Good luck. Your wedding day began before sunrise and was basically an endurance sport. You're sealed into a dress with more boning than a fish market, starving, thirsty, and unable to sit properly. It's like running a marathon in a lace coffin. It all starts with the first hint of daylight, and before you even open your eyes, there's already someone bustling around your bed with a tepid cup of tea, a warning about punctuality, and a hairbrush that looks like it's seen the Napoleonic Wars. The maid is already in crisis mode. One wrong move and your carefully planned morning will topple into Victorian chaos. You're not allowed breakfast, obviously. Eating would ruin the tightness of the corset. And we all know nothing says romance like a bride on the brink of fainting from hunger. You shuffle to the washstand, no hot showers here, just a chilly splash of water and a face cloth that smells faintly of carbolic soap and existential dread. The next step? Sitting for the world's most aggressive hairstyling. 3 women at least are armed with combs, pins, and a level of determination that can only be described as militaristic. Victorian bridal hair is less about style and more about engineering. The result is an updo so rigid you could use it as a battering ram in an emergency. By the time the last curl is pinned, your scalp feels like it's been personally insulted by Queen Victoria herself. Now comes the dress, a contraption engineered to turn a human body into a piece of wedding cake. There are layers. So many layers. First the chemise, then the stockings, then the petticoat, then another petticoat, and then the crinoline, which is less of a skirt and more of a small personal hoop house. Then the corset, of course, pulled tight by an aunt who swears, "It's for your own good, dear." You cling to the bedpost as they yank the laces, hoping your internal organs will one day forgive you for this betrayal. The gown itself is a vision in white, if your vision is blurry from lack of oxygen. Lace, ruffles, pearl buttons, and a train so long it deserves its own address. The dress is beautiful, yes, but it is also an obstacle course. Every movement has to be carefully calculated, or you risk tripping, tearing, or, worse, exposing an ankle. The horror. Your gloves are buttoned on so tightly you can't actually bend your fingers. Your shoes are dainty torture devices. And the veil? It's heavy, scratchy, and designed to obscure both your face and your ability to see danger coming. Hours pass in a fog of perfume and panicked whispers. You're not allowed to sit properly, because the crinoline will snap like a bear trap. And you're not allowed to stand too long, or you'll pass out and ruin the photographs, by which I mean the single, blurry, black and white image that will be taken if the photographer's magnesium flash doesn't set your hair on fire. Every time you need to visit the bathroom, a team of women must accompany you to lift, unbutton, and generally act as a pit crew for your dress. The process takes 20 minutes and approximately 2 feet of prayer. When the ceremony finally arrives, you're paraded down the aisle like a beautifully wrapped anxiety attack, barely able to breathe or focus. The crowd is huge: second cousins, neighbors, and a mysterious woman no one recognizes but who's been at every family event since 1842. You try to look serene, but your feet are numb. Your jaw aches from forced smiles, and your head is pounding from the 47 hairpins holding your dignity in place. By the time you reach the end of the day, you are dehydrated, exhausted, and held together by a combination of boning, willpower, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll get a piece of wedding cake before collapsing. You've survived Victorian nuptials' answer to the Ironman triathlon. Congratulations. Tomorrow, you get to do it all again. Only this time, you're expected to know what marital duties actually mean. Good luck. Standing at the altar, you're mostly thinking about whether you remembered to breathe. Your future husband looks nervous or nauseous. You're not sure which, and neither is he. The church is packed. There are cousins you've never met, neighbors in uncomfortable hats, and one aunt whose entire purpose seems to be silently mouthing corrections if you do anything unladylike, such as blinking too quickly or existing with enthusiasm. The priest begins the ceremony, and you realize, to your horror, that your veil is slipping. A bead of sweat threatens to drip down your nose, but you can't move to fix it. You try not to imagine what would happen if the entire thing slid off your head and onto the floor. You'd probably have to move to Canada. You can barely see your fiancé through the layers of tulle and lace shrouding your face. The veil is supposed to symbolize purity and mystery, but in practice, it's just blinding. You start to worry about tripping. What if you take the wrong step and tumble off the dais, making history as the first Victorian bride to be both married and concussed before lunch? Every inch of you itches with a combination of nerves and taffeta. Around you, the air is thick with the scents of flowers, perfume, and anticipation. You can feel the congregation's eyes on you like 1,000 tiny pins. This is the moment every etiquette book warned you about, but none of them mentioned the overwhelming urge to run out the back door. The priest's words echo through the stone church, solemn and a little menacing, because nothing says forever like a reminder that this is binding, legal, and probably covered in the Book of Common Prayer somewhere around page 237. You glance sideways at your soon-to-be husband. His collar is starched to the point of strangulation, and his hands are shaking slightly as he fumbles for the ring. His face says joy, but his eyes say, "I hope I remember the words." You suddenly realize you have no idea what his middle name is. You're not alone. Half the people here don't even know yours. The vows begin, and you're expected to repeat ancient phrases you've practiced exactly once, last night, in front of a mirror, while your mother shouted corrections from the hallway. To love, honor, and obey. The words are loaded, heavy as your dress. Your voice cracks halfway through, and you briefly wonder if anyone will notice if you just skip to "I do" and hope for the best. He stumbles over your name, almost calling you by his sisters, but you decide to let it slide. There are bigger problems looming, like the fact that your gloves are on backwards and you're not entirely sure you'll be able to get the ring over your knuckle without divine intervention. Every pause in the ceremony feels like an eternity. The silence is broken only by the sound of your own heartbeat and the faint wheezing of Great Uncle Bertram in the third pew. You desperately want to look composed, but your mind is running through every possible disaster. What if you sneeze during the final blessing? What if you drop the ring? What if, in a moment of panic, you bolt for the door and are remembered forever as the one who ran? The pressure of living up to the expectations of generations of family ghosts is almost enough to make you faint, but the corset's got you covered there. Finally, you're told you may kiss the bride. a phrase that sends a new wave of panic through both you and your groom. He leans in awkwardly, and you both manage to bump noses, almost dislodging your veil entirely. The congregation lets out a collective breath, part relief, part disappointment at the lack of full-on catastrophe. You are now officially married. Congratulations, you survived the veils, the vows, and the vague terror of Victorian matrimony's opening act. All that's left is the party, the photos, and, somewhere in the back of your mind, the realization that you still have no idea what happens next. Your mother sat you down and tried to explain marital duty. What you got was a series of metaphors about flowers, bees, and national pride. You are now more confused than ever, and slightly concerned about England. She started the conversation with a heavy sigh, the kind that means this is going to be worse than when I told you where babies come from. There's tea on the table, but nobody drinks it. Instead, your mother pulls out a handkerchief and dabs her forehead, looking everywhere but at you. You brace yourself. If you were hoping for straight answers, you're about to be sorely disappointed. It is a woman's place to receive, she says, trailing off, as if the rest of the sentence is classified. You must always remember, dear, to think of roses in bloom, or perhaps the loyal beehive. This is somehow less helpful than you'd hoped. Now you're picturing bees, thousands of them, swarming around in a state of marital bliss, which is a deeply unsettling mental image. Your mother leans in and lowers her voice, as if spies might be lurking in the drapery. A wife must always be agreeable in the marital bed, for the sake of her husband's happiness and the stability of the empire. The empire? You're starting to feel as though Queen Victoria herself is peeking through the window, clipboard in hand, ready to rate your performance. She gives you a pamphlet, probably written by someone who has never even seen a married couple, full of cryptic advice. Let him lead. Let your mind drift to more pleasant things, and if you must, imagine you are lying on a picnic rug. You'd like to ask what kind of picnic involves a man who hasn't spoken to you without stammering in 6 months, but the opportunity never comes. And remember, it is quite possible to get through it all without undue fuss. Some even find it pleasant, in time. Her face betrays a certain skepticism about that last part. Questions bubble up, but every attempt at directness is swatted away. But what actually happens? You ask, in what you believe is a reasonable tone. Your mother chokes on her tea, fans herself vigorously, and launches into a story about her wedding night that mostly involves a wardrobe malfunction, the family dog, and an unexpected visit from Aunt Penelope. The main lesson seems to be, always lock the door, never trust a candle, and if all else fails, feign sleep. By now you're thinking marital duty sounds more like a military campaign than an act of romance. The more your mother explains, the less you understand. There are warnings about overexertion, tips on how to politely excuse oneself if feeling faint, and stern advice to never, under any circumstances, look too interested. Apparently, the worst thing you can do is appear to enjoy yourself. Victorian intimacy, it seems, is a grim, obligatory exercise best endured with stoicism and maybe some embroidery. Eventually, she turns philosophical. Every woman faces this, and every woman survives. Just remember, you are an English woman. Stiff upper lip, dear. You're unsure whether this applies to your mouth or some other part of your anatomy, but you nod dutifully. She concludes the talk with a reminder to say your prayers and maybe hum a hymn if things get particularly awkward. You're left sitting on the edge of your bed, clutching a pamphlet haunted by bees, flowers, and the persistent fear that failing at marital duty could somehow bring down the British Empire. You wonder if your future husband has received a similar talk, or if he's just been handed a pat on the back and told, "Don't make a mess." That night, as you try to sleep, you realize that Victorian romance is a riddle wrapped in a euphemism, delivered with a cup of weak tea and a warning to think of England. You drift off wondering if anyone, anywhere, actually knows what's going on, or if everyone is just faking it for the Queen and country. After hours of cake, guests, and dancing, you're finally led to the bedroom, where the housemaid quietly locks the door behind you. No pressure. Just you, your new husband, and the sudden realization that neither of you knows what to do next. You both stand in the center of the room like awkward actors who've wandered onto the wrong stage. There's a pause so heavy you can almost hear the housemaid's footsteps fading down the hall, and the distant, gleeful cackling of relatives in the next room, probably placing bets on how long it'll take before you both faint from embarrassment. The bed looms in the corner, enormous, canopied, and covered in lace that looks like it's been inherited from a time when dinosaurs walked the earth. A single, sad candle sputters on the nightstand, casting more shadows than light, making the room feel less like a romantic haven and more like the set of a mildly alarming ghost story. You try to think of something to say. Nice bed. Seems like a solid start. But it comes out as more of a croak. Your husband nods, smiles too wide, and then stares intently at the carpet, as if hoping for divine intervention or maybe a secret trapdoor. For a moment, you both stand absolutely still, frozen in place by generations of vague warnings, mixed metaphors, and the overwhelming scent of lavender sachets. Everything in the room is trying far too hard. The bedspread is embroidered with initials and what might be lilies or possibly mutant cabbages. The pillows are stacked higher than your confidence level. There's a bottle of something on the dresser, probably nervous tonic, which you're supposed to sip for courage. Neither of you moves to open it. Instead, you both begin the most complicated game of unspoken charades in Victorian history. Should you sit? Stand? Shake hands? Do you start a conversation about the weather? Or perhaps the relative merits of sponge cake? The window is shut tight, the fire barely smouldering. You wonder how many people are listening outside. The answer, judging by the occasional creak on the landing, is all of them. There's a peculiar pressure in the air, equal parts anticipation, terror, and a dash of indigestion from too much boiled beef at the wedding breakfast. Your new husband finally clears his throat and mumbles something about the moon, which is not visible but seems safer than mentioning anything that might actually happen in this room. You nod, offer a nervous laugh, and contemplate the heavy brocade curtains. They look like they've seen things. Unspoken expectations press down, and it's suddenly clear that the locked door is less about privacy and more about making absolutely sure you don't escape before the deed is done. Neither of you is sure about the next step. There's a moment where you both begin to attempt something resembling a hug, but with so many layers of clothing and the lingering terror of accidental impropriety, you end up somewhere between a handshake and a wrestling move. The bed creaks menacingly even when you look at it too hard. You both jump. Eventually, there's nothing left to do but start the practicalities. The process of removing Victorian wedding attire is less like undressing and more like defusing a bomb. He fumbles with the first button, you giggle nervously, and both of you discover that the human body is not, in fact, designed to be unwrapped like a particularly fragile porcelain teapot. It takes several attempts, one near miss with a hairpin, and at least 3 apologies before any real progress is made. Somewhere, a clock chimes midnight. You realize you're both exhausted. The fear of doing the wrong thing now competes with the much more pressing urge to just lie down and maybe, if you're lucky, sleep for 12 hours. After all, you've both survived a wedding, a gauntlet of relatives, and the world's longest day in formal wear. For tonight, maybe that's enough. And as you finally settle, 2 inches apart on a bed that could sleep 6, you both realize the locked door isn't the problem. It's the expectation waiting on the other side. But as sleep finally pulls you under, you silently agree. You'll figure out the rest tomorrow, or the day after. England will manage. It turns out, removing a Victorian corset is a 2-person job requiring more teamwork than most Victorian marriages. You're sweating, he's panicking, and nobody is feeling particularly romantic. At first, it looks simple. Just a bit of ribbon, a few hooks, maybe a delicate tug here or there. How hard can it be? The answer is extremely. The corset, that laced-up marvel of 19th century engineering, was designed by people who clearly wanted to discourage both spontaneous romance and deep breathing. Now, in the half-lit hush of your wedding chamber, you are both discovering that undoing a day's worth of sartorial architecture is the real final exam of marriage. You stand, hands braced on the edge of the vanity, while your new husband circles you with the look of someone about to attempt a bomb disposal. He tries to make conversation, but it comes out as small, panicked yelps. Is this the knot? And are you sure you're still breathing? The room is filled with the faint rustle of silk, the odd snap of a bone, hopefully just whalebone, and your own increasingly desperate laughter. You can feel sweat beading at your hairline, made worse by the fact that you haven't actually eaten since dawn, and you're still half dizzy from the day's excitement, the nerves, and the 2 sips of sherry forced upon you by your great-aunt. The corset, which started the day snug and reassuring, now feels like a medieval torture device. It's pinching, poking, and making a solid case for being declared a public menace. He locates the laces. Or at least, he thinks he does. Victorian corsets have more hidden fastenings than a bank vault. Hooks, ties, and loops appear in places you didn't know you had. Maybe we should just cut it off, he whispers, half serious. The idea is tempting, but you both know your mother would materialize out of the wallpaper to scold you for wanton waste. So you soldier on, feeling more like Houdini preparing for a water escape than a blushing bride. Meanwhile, the bed creaks every time you shift, a relentless soundtrack to your undignified struggle. The flickering candle throws wild shadows on the walls, as if the room itself is snickering at your predicament. Every so often, he stops to check if you're okay. Can you breathe? Is this supposed to hurt? Are you still alive? These are not the questions you pictured on your wedding night. 5 minutes stretch into 10, then 20. You exchange nervous jokes and awkward apologies. You try to direct him to the trickier knots, but your instructions quickly devolve into, "No, not that one. Wait, yes, that one. No, now you've tied a bow." The laughter becomes genuine, and the frustration turns into a kind of camaraderie. You realize that at least you're in this together. Eventually, with a heroic last pull, the laces give way. The corset slumps to the floor in a small, vengeful heap. You both stare at it, as if expecting it to reanimate and crawl back onto your ribs out of spite. You take your first deep breath of the day and immediately become lightheaded. Victory tastes like candle wax and relief. You look at your husband. His hair is sticking up, his hands are shaking, and he's sweating almost as much as you are. He grins, sheepishly, but with real affection. The ice is broken. Whatever happens next, it cannot possibly be more difficult than the great corset removal of 1871. You collapse onto the bed, breathless but laughing. If this is what Victorian intimacy looks like, so be it. You've both survived. Somewhere, your ancestors are nodding in approval, and your mother is probably still clutching her pearls. The romance may be delayed, but at least you know you work well together under pressure, and that's the start of something, even if it's not what anyone expected. Your new husband is either very eager or very shy. Either way, he's also received 0 useful instructions beyond, be gentle, and try not to trip over the chamber pot. The first thing you notice, apart from his sudden fascination with the wallpaper pattern, is that he seems just as terrified as you. He fidgets with his cufflinks, clears his throat every 10 seconds, and glances at the door like he's hoping someone, anyone, might barge in and provide emergency guidance. He's wearing more starch than a bakery, and every time he tries to look suave, his collar attempts to strangle him. He offers you a smile that's somewhere between trust me and help me. You try to smile back, but your lips are numb from nerves and the lingering pressure of the day's forced grins. For a moment, you both stand in the echoing awkwardness of the bridal suite, waiting for some ancient instinct to kick in and explain what's supposed to happen next. Victorian society has not done him any favors. The marital education provided to men is as sparse and cryptic as the one delivered to women, but with extra emphasis on self-control and avoiding scandal. His entire romantic training consists of whispered warnings from elderly relatives and a dog-eared copy of some etiquette book written by a retired bishop. If he's lucky, someone once gave him a speech about respecting your wife's delicate sensibilities. If he's unlucky, he got the birds and bees talk from a cousin who thought everything could be solved by simply not thinking about it too hard. He sits at the edge of the bed, staring at his hands, which seems suddenly gigantic and useless. After a long pause, he asks you if you'd like some water. You say yes, partly because you're parched and partly because it buys time. He pours it for you, sloshes a little onto the nightstand, and nearly knocks over the nervous tonic. You both laugh, a little too loudly, but it helps. A small, shared rebellion against the pressure pressing in from every direction. You begin to realize that your new husband, for all his bluster, or lack thereof, is just as unprepared as you are. He tries to be gallant, offers to help with the buttons on your dress, then fumbles and drops one. He attempts a compliment about your hair, but gets lost halfway through and winds up praising your remarkably symmetrical ear. He apologizes so much, you start to suspect this is his natural conversational rhythm. He's also struggling to navigate the etiquette of intimacy. Victorian men are told to be dignified at all costs. But it's hard to be dignified when your trousers keep snagging on the brass bedpost. If he's enthusiastic, it's in a puppyish, over-eager way, leaping into action before remembering that action requires actual instructions. If he's shy, he moves at a glacial pace, so cautious that you start to worry you might fall asleep before anything actually happens. At one point, he offers to read you a passage from the marital manual someone left on the dresser. You both get 3 sentences in before dissolving into helpless giggles at the author's serious warnings about inflamed passions and the perils of eating cheese after 9 o'clock. It's the first genuine moment of connection all night. Eventually, you both begin to relax, united by mutual bewilderment and a healthy fear of Victorian furniture. You swap stories about childhood misadventures, schoolyard pranks, and embarrassing family members. He confesses his terror of the housemaid, who, to be fair, could probably out-wrestle him, and you admit you still don't really understand what marital duty is, except that you're apparently supposed to think about England. As the night wears on, you realize that maybe it's fine that neither of you knows what you're doing. Maybe that's how everyone feels, at least at first. In a world obsessed with appearances, your first impressions are awkward, honest, and, surprisingly, kind of sweet. You both fall asleep still laughing, grateful that, at least tonight, being married mostly means not having to go through all of this alone. The bed is decorated with itchy lace, stuffed with horsehair, and creaks so loudly it could double as a shipwreck sound effect. Every movement is a public announcement. You stare at it, wide-eyed. This is not the soft, pillowy oasis that poets and greeting cards have promised. This is an obstacle course with a canopy. The lace trim, which looked charming by candlelight from the doorway, up close is a rash waiting to happen. It scratches your arms, snags your hair, and seems to emit a faint smell of lavender and ancient dust, possibly the ghost of weddings past. The mattress itself is a masterclass in Victorian resourcefulness, and not in a good way. If you thought memory foam was a luxury, you'll be thrilled to learn that this mattress remembers nothing except disappointment. It's been fluffed by generations of bored maids, which means it's stuffed unevenly with horsehair, old rags, and if you're especially unlucky, a few leftover wedding favours from 1846. It sags in the middle, peaks at the corners, and offers more lumps than a Victorian pudding. You and your husband attempt to sit on the edge, and the entire contraption groans in protest. The wooden frame shudders, the canopy above trembles, and the floorboards underneath sigh as if bracing for impact. It's a symphony of squeaks, groans, and alarming snaps. For a moment you consider sleeping on the floor, but the rug looks suspiciously alive with embroidery, and, possibly, beetles. Your first attempt to lie down is an exercise in caution. You lower yourself gingerly, hoping to distribute your weight in a way that won't result in collapse or, worse, an unscheduled visit to the servants' quarters below. Your husband tries to follow, and the bed erupts with a sound somewhere between a foghorn and a haunted accordion. You both freeze, staring at each other, waiting to see if anyone comes to investigate the commotion. Outside the door, the house settles with a corresponding creak. You can almost hear the relatives on the other side making notes for tomorrow's breakfast conversation. The walls are thin, every laugh, gasp, and groan carries as far as the kitchen, where you suspect even the cat is listening with great interest. The bedding itself is a hazard. The embroidered sheets feel like sandpaper. The pillowcases are stiff with starch, ruffled and monogrammed to the point of absurdity. As you try to arrange yourself, a stray feather escapes from the pillow, floats gently in front of your nose, and then settles directly in your mouth. You cough. The bed protests. Your husband's face is a study in forced optimism. Sleep, you realize, will not come easily. Every movement is amplified and broadcast, so much for privacy. Lying perfectly still seems the best strategy. But even then, the mattress shifts beneath you, creating a low moan that sounds uncomfortably like someone's disapproving grandmother. The idea of romance is quickly replaced by a mutual desire for silence and stability. At some point, you both attempt to get comfortable, pulling the itchy coverlet up to your chins and trying to ignore the horsehair poking through. You discuss possible sleeping arrangements. He suggests top and tail, you suggest separate rooms, and you both laugh a little too loudly. The bed, predictably, squeaks in protest. As you stare up at the canopy, embroidered, dusty, and definitely home to at least one spider, you reflect on the realities of Victorian married life. The bed is less a place of dreams and more a test of endurance. Romance here is not about whispers and roses, it's about navigating splinters, lumps, and the fear of waking the entire household with a single sneeze. In the end, you both settle into a careful truce with the mattress, agreeing to move as little as possible and hope the morning comes quickly. The bed might be lumpy, laced, and loud, but at least you're in it together, partners in discomfort, co-captains of the HMS Matrimony, braving the noisy seas of Victorian wedlock. There's no electricity, so your only light comes from flickering candles, making everything look haunted. Romance meets poltergeist chic. You glance around the room, watching the shadows dance on every ruffled edge of the wallpaper, twisting the delicate patterns of roses and vines into something that looks suspiciously like the face of your late Aunt Mildred, the one who always said you'd never amount to anything if you didn't learn the proper way to fold a napkin. The effect is less passionate bridal suite and more mild seance with accidental taxidermy. You try to create some atmosphere. Everyone talks about candlelight being romantic, after all. But in real life, it's less golden glow and more Elizabethan ghost story. The candles are stubborn, for one thing. Some gutter in the draught, others lean perilously close to the bed curtains, and one heroic specimen seems determined to drown itself in its own wax. No matter how you arrange them, you get either near total darkness or full eyes-in-the-wallpaper shadow puppet theatre. Your husband attempts to strike a match, misses, and for a brief moment, the room smells powerfully of sulphur and fear. When he finally gets the candle going, he's so startled by the sudden flare that he nearly drops it onto his own shoe. You both burst out laughing, nerves and candlelight mixing into a kind of hysteria that feels a lot like surviving a minor disaster together. Of course, every candle flicker creates a new monster in the corner. The lace draped over the dressing table sways just so, taking on the unmistakable silhouette of a Victorian spinster, bent on haunting anyone with an untucked bedsheet. The wardrobe creaks as it always does, but tonight it sounds less like old wood settling and more like vampire taking attendance. You quickly discover that candlelight flatters exactly no one at close range. Instead of the rosy glow of romance novels, your faces are thrown into sharp relief, eye sockets dark, cheekbones severe, teeth gleaming like a Halloween skeleton. You wonder, briefly, if anyone in Victorian England ever actually looked attractive by candlelight, or if they just said they did out of politeness. At least, you reassure yourself, you both look equally ghoulish. A shared horror is still a kind of intimacy. There are practical considerations too. Every time you try to move, the candlelight flickers threateningly. One wrong gust, and you'll be plunged into utter darkness, left to fumble around in a room full of antique breakables and your own unfamiliar spouse. The location of the chamber pot becomes more important than ever. You'd rather not find it with your bare feet. Your husband, ever gallant, offers to adjust the wicks. He manages to snuff out 2 candles and almost sets his sleeve alight with a third. You hand him a handkerchief, just in case. After a while, you give up on arranging the lighting and settle for the most strategic option. 1 candle, placed safely on the farthest table, illuminating just enough of the bed to confirm that yes, there are indeed still far too many decorative pillows. Somewhere outside, the wind picks up and the candle flames bend in unison, casting shadows that creep across the ceiling like silent, nosy relatives. The house itself seems to sigh, boards shifting, windows rattling ever so slightly. If you weren't so tired, you'd be nervous. Instead, you take a deep breath and let the strangeness of the room wash over you. Maybe romance is overrated. Maybe candlelight was always meant to be a little bit scary. A reminder that love, like shadow puppets, works best when you don't look at it too closely. You and your husband exchange a final conspiratorial smile, both grateful that if there are ghosts, at least you're haunting this night together. In the soft, unreliable light, you settle in for sleep, surrounded by shadows, laughter, and the unspoken promise that tomorrow will bring a little more sunlight and a lot less ghostly ambience. You're very aware that half the household is listening at the door, judging your performance. Every squeak is a headline in tomorrow's family gossip. It's an unspoken rule in the Victorian house. No newlywed is ever truly alone. The walls have ears, the corridors have shadows, and every member of your new extended family has assembled just out of sight, holding their breath and praying for a juicy story to share over breakfast. You lie in bed, stiff, silent, and suddenly hyper-aware of every rustle of sheets, every nervous cough, and every ominous creak of the wedding bed. You swear the house was quieter before you got married, as if the entire building is now participating in a collective exercise of suspense. Outside your door, an army of in-laws looms. Your mother-in-law, clutching her pearls, your father-in-law, pretending to read the newspaper but actually eavesdropping from behind a potted plant. Several unmarried sisters, stifling giggles and making bets about how long before someone drops a candlestick. Even the housemaid lurks on the landing, ready to dash off and update the kitchen staff on any news of progress. Victorian privacy is an illusion, more of a suggestion really, and one that's almost never honoured. You try to move as little as possible, knowing that every sound will be dissected by the family grapevine. You think about rolling over, but hesitate, worried that the horsehair mattress will broadcast your movement like a cannon shot. Your new husband seems equally paralysed, lying next to you like a man who's been mistaken for a wax figure. You both stare at the canopy, wide-eyed, and try to communicate telepathically. Don't move. Don't even breathe too loudly. We'll wait them out. The silence grows heavier by the minute. Someone out in the corridor coughs, and you both jump. For all you know, there are aunts pressed ear to panel, taking notes and keeping score. You suspect there's a chalkboard in the drawing room where the family will record the night's results. Stars for noise, hearts for scandal, frowny faces for failure to launch. You would laugh, but you're afraid it'll sound suspiciously cheerful. Victorian family gatherings are all about reputation. A successful wedding night isn't just a personal milestone. It's a sporting event with generations of expectations riding on it. Your mother-in-law wants to be the first to hear good news, code for evidence of future grandchildren, while your father-in-law just wants to avoid another awkward conversation about delicate matters. If nothing happens, everyone will politely ignore you at breakfast. If anything happens, they'll know. Oh, they'll know. It doesn't help that gossip travels at the speed of light in this house. If you sneeze, the butler knows. If a floorboard groans, it's reported directly to the parlour. Even the cat, whose main skill is appearing where he's least wanted, seems to be lurking outside the door, tail twitching with judgment. Somewhere in the silence, you hear the faint clink of teacups in the drawing room, another round of nervous refreshments as the family waits for the all clear. It's enough to make you consider running away to the colonies, or at least the cellar. Eventually, you both decide the only safe thing to do is fall asleep, quietly, without so much as a sigh. Tomorrow, you'll face the knowing looks, the loaded questions, and the coded congratulations. You'll have to answer to the aunts, the uncles, and the omnipresent, all-seeing grandmother whose entire hobby is reading between the lines. As you finally drift off, you wonder how many couples throughout history have survived this same gauntlet of prying relatives, thin walls, and the relentless pressure to perform, not just for each other, but for an entire household. You promise yourself that someday, when your children marry, you'll let them have at least one night of peace. But for now, you lie perfectly still, listening to the silence and hoping that your only legacy from this night will be a good story and not a headline in the morning's gossip. If you're very unlucky, the housemaid offers to stand by in case you need help. Nobody knows what help she could possibly offer, and nobody wants to find out. It's the final humiliation in a long line of Victorian wedding night indignities. Just as you're finally alone, well, as alone as you can be with your new husband and an entire extended family lurking within earshot, there's a knock at the door. It's the housemaid, hovering in the corridor, apron starched and posture rigid, offering her services in the bland, practiced tone of someone who has seen too much and slept too little. "Will there be anything else tonight, madam? Shall I stay in case you require assistance?" It is not clear if she means with the corset, the chamber pot, or the emotional unravelling of two people about to learn the limitations of Victorian advice pamphlets. You stammer a polite refusal, but the housemaid lingers just a little too long, eyes darting from the fire to the pile of crumpled lace on the chair. She smooths the bedspread, as if it will stay smooth for more than 5 seconds, straightens the pillows with the efficiency of a drill sergeant, and then does the most unsettling thing of all. She silently surveys both of you, as if conducting a final inspection before an important medical procedure. Your husband offers a nervous cough. The maid raises an eyebrow. You glance at your shoes. No one moves. The awkwardness swells, filling the room with more tension than a midnight séance. You suspect the housemaid has been briefed by the older generation to keep an eye out, to make sure the wedding night is proceeding according to the ancient and mysterious code of British family honour. Eventually, she turns her attention to the fireplace, poking at the coals with grim determination. "Cold night for it," she says, as if you're all about to go shovel snow rather than embark on the least coordinated marital ritual of the season. She tuts at the faintest chill, throws on an extra lump of coal, and spends far too long fussing with the matches. Every second she stays, the prospect of romance wilts just a bit further. And then, as if on cue, she brings up the chamber pot. "You'll find it clean, this time," she announces, tone layered with all sorts of unspeakable stories about past wedding nights. You thank her, already regretting the existence of indoor plumbing. For a moment, you fear she might actually demonstrate its use, but instead, she stands back, arms folded, waiting for something. You're not sure what, and you absolutely don't want to find out. Finally, she seems satisfied with the arrangement of towels, bed linens, and water pitcher. Before she leaves, she fixes you both with a look that says, "Good luck, but also, don't mess up the linens, I just washed them." Then, with a final, perfectly measured curtsy, she closes the door, but not all the way. You watch in horror as she leaves it open a crack, just in case you need to call her back for further assistance. The symbolism is about as subtle as a marching band. You both freeze, waiting for her footsteps to retreat, only daring to breathe once you're certain she's gone. But the damage is done. The spell is broken. The only thing less romantic than the prospect of in-law gossip is the possibility of a housemaid barging in halfway through with fresh towels and unsolicited advice on how to proceed. In a house like this, privacy is a myth, carefully curated by generations of household staff with better hearing than a pack of bloodhounds. You lie back, exhausted, grateful that at least you've survived the ritual of the housemaid. And as you stare up at the flickering ceiling shadows, you realize, in the Victorian era, love is a team sport. Unfortunately, the whole team is in the hallway. Tomorrow, the maid will bring tea and offer a knowing wink. Tonight, she's left you with a new marital lesson. There is no such thing as a private moment in a house full of servants, only degrees of embarrassment. You'd love to freshen up, but the only bathroom is a bowl of tepid water and a damp cloth. Welcome to the least sexy sponge bath in history. The washstand sits by the window, the lone oasis in a desert of questionable cleanliness. On top, a porcelain basin half filled with lukewarm water, a bar of soap that's mostly slivers and family hair, and a washcloth that's been boiled so many times it's practically translucent. You approach this setup with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for tax season. Victorian bathing is not so much a process as a polite negotiation with dirt. You dip the cloth in the water, give it a quick squeeze, and attempt to tackle the accumulated grime of a day spent being squeezed, pinched, and paraded around in layers of taffeta and panic sweat. There's no privacy. Your new husband is probably fussing with his collar somewhere in the background, pretending not to watch as you try to scrub the world off your face without removing your dignity or your hairdo. There's no running water, no hot shower, not even the luxury of a scented bath bomb. The closest you get to spa treatment is the faint whiff of carbolic soap and the delicate sensation of goosebumps rising as the tepid water grazes your skin. The basin water turns an alarming shade of grey almost immediately, but you keep going. Victorian standards demand it. Even if you suspect that the last bride to use this washstand left behind a legacy of cold, soapy suffering. The soap itself is a marvel of 19th century chemistry, so harsh it could clean industrial machinery, so strongly perfumed that every guest on the street below will know you washed tonight. You work up a meagre lather and then try to remember which bits are socially acceptable to wash in front of your spouse. It's a short list. Anything beyond hands, face, and maybe a polite swipe at the collarbone is considered risque, a sure path to scandal, or at the very least family legend. Meanwhile, your new husband approaches the bowl as if it might contain live leeches. He manages a few nervous splashes to the face, scrubs at his neck with the kind of grim determination seen only in people about to fight in wars, and then calls it quits, towel draped over his shoulder like a white flag of surrender. You both eye the water, now the colour of weak tea, and decide that's enough personal grooming for the evening. Towels in the Victorian age are a comedy all their own, scratchy, slightly damp, and embroidered with a monogram so elaborate you need a map to find the actual fabric. Drying off is more of an exfoliation than an act of comfort. You end up red-faced, hair slightly askew, but at least, according to the etiquette manuals, ready for conjugal bliss. As for the washcloth, it's quietly retired to the laundry basket, where it will spend the next 3 weeks fermenting. You might consider brushing your teeth, but the available implements, a wooden toothbrush and some mysterious black powder labelled dentifrice, look more like tools for witchcraft than oral hygiene. A cursory swipe across the molars is all you can manage before admitting defeat. If you're lucky, you'll still have most of your enamel by morning. Finally, there's the matter of the chamber pot, lurking in the shadows. It is neither private nor dignified, and its presence is a constant reminder that, despite the lace and candlelight, you are still just one false move away from Victorian disaster. You both pretend it doesn't exist. As you climb into bed, skin tingling from the world's least luxurious sponge bath, you realize there is nothing romantic about Victorian hygiene. It's a process best endured with humor, patience, and the quiet hope that one day someone will invent indoor plumbing. Until then, love is blind and, quite frankly, slightly sticky. Your undergarments are designed for maximum confusion. You're tangled, buttoned, and swaddled like a baby, but much less comfortable. The reality of Victorian lingerie is a masterclass in over-engineering. Nothing is straightforward. There's a chemise, because of course there is, made from enough starched linen to sail a small boat. Over that, drawers, voluminous, ruffled, and open-crotched for airflow, and because no one wants to undo all the other layers just to use the chamber pot. Then come the stays. A boned, laced contraption engineered to make your torso look classically elegant, which is to say, unnaturally compressed. By the time you add petticoats, you're wearing enough fabric to single-handedly bankrupt a textile mill. There are at least 3, each scratchier than the last. You try to remember the correct order, but it's a choose-your-own-adventure with only bad endings. Your limbs are pinned at odd angles, trapped by ruffles, lace, and the occasional rogue ribbon. There's always one mysterious button that seems to have no purpose except to jab you in the ribs and remind you that comfort is for the lower classes. Victorian undergarments are allegedly about modesty, but in practice, they're just a highly effective barrier to entry. They might as well come with a lock and a small warning sign for the husband. Abandon hope, all ye who attempt. The prospect of disrobing is so daunting, it could be used as a Victorian team-building exercise. You and your new husband could bond for hours just trying to find the end of a lace drawstring. You glance at your reflection in the mirror, but all you see is a ruffled, trussed marshmallow. Gone is the myth of delicate, alluring negligee. Instead, you look ready for either a polar expedition or an overly elaborate kidnapping. There's no hint of romance, unless your idea of romance involves feeling like you're being slowly gift-wrapped by your enemies. Meanwhile, your husband stands by, looking less like a suitor and more like someone preparing to scale a fortress. He offers help, but quickly becomes entangled in a system of ribbons, so complicated you suspect it's actually a secret Victorian code. At one point, you both give up and just try to wiggle the chemise off over your head, leading to a scene that would have made Queen Victoria faint and your housemaid request hazard pay. And just when you think you're free, you discover another hidden fastening, a hook and eye somewhere behind your left shoulder blade, reachable only by circus performers or octopuses. The stays dig in mercilessly, your petticoat bunches awkwardly, and all dignity evaporates. There's nothing seductive about this process. It's more like escaping from a historical reenactment gone wrong. As you wrestle with the last of the petticoats, your hair, carefully arranged for hours, becomes a casualty of the struggle, a wild tangle that now resembles a startled bird's nest. The notion of lingerie as a tool of seduction is, at this point, laughable. Instead, it's a declaration of war between you, gravity, and the laws of textile physics. Eventually, after much apologizing, a few close calls, and a minor existential crisis, you stand victorious, more exhausted than you were after your own wedding reception. Your husband is wide-eyed, both impressed and slightly afraid. You're red-faced, slightly sweaty, and deeply relieved to be, at long last, free from the tyranny of Victorian lingerie. In the final analysis, there's nothing passionate about these undergarments. They're less an invitation to romance, and more a historical booby trap. But as you collapse, giggling at the absurdity of it all, you realize you've survived yet another Victorian rite of passage. And honestly, if you can get through this together, you can get through anything, though preferably while wearing a lot less linen. Someone has left a book called The Duties of Wives. You try reading it, but it's written in code, and every page makes things worse. The cover is stern, leather, bound, gold embossed, and entirely too heavy for comfort. It sits on the nightstand like a moral anchor, glaring at you with the silent authority of a clergyman's raised eyebrow. You open it, hopeful for clear guidance, but soon discover the author was less interested in clarity and more invested in mysterious hints, dire warnings, and metaphors about rosebuds and wifely submission. The tone is equal parts schoolmaster and doomsday prophet. You wonder if there's a chapter on how to escape through the window or just several on gracious suffering. The opening section is titled A Wife's Sacred Duty, which sounds promising until you realize it's a euphemism for everything no one will say out loud. You search the index for first night, but find only modesty, obedience, and the appropriate use of a tea cozy. You read on and are promptly advised to always appear cheerful, to submit with grace, and to keep your voice no louder than the softest zephyr. If you don't know what a zephyr is, that's your first strike as a wife. The next page launches into a bizarre explanation of marital harmony, involving metaphors about swans, lilies, and, bafflingly, the stoic embrace of the English drizzle. You're not sure what's expected: romance or meteorological endurance. The advice for awkward moments is to fix your thoughts on higher things. Examples include embroidery, charitable works, and, of course, the empire. You wonder if humming God Save the Queen is acceptable when things get particularly confusing. Then there's the infamous schedule, a chart that helpfully suggests how often a respectable couple should partake in conjugal union. The answer, it seems, is rarely, preferably with your eyes closed and your mind on your needlepoint. Wednesday evenings are to be avoided, for the nerves, and Sunday mornings are out of the question, for the soul. Spontaneity is so dangerous it requires a footnote warning and possibly a doctor's note. If you were hoping for practical instructions, you're out of luck. The marital manual is written with the assumption that you already know everything. But just in case you don't, here's a full page on the dangers of excessive merriment and why laughter should be reserved for after breakfast, and never, under any circumstances, before prayers. There is also an entire chapter dedicated to silent suffering, which is apparently the highest form of devotion and a useful skill if your new husband snores. Your husband, curious about your furrowed brow, leans over to read a line and immediately regrets it. He tries to find the section for husbands, only to discover it's a single page at the back, entitled Be Steadfast, Provide Coal. You both burst out laughing, which is probably not allowed according to page 43, subsection on frivolity. In desperation, you flip to the glossary, hoping for some translation of the book's Victorian code. Instead, you find a list of forbidden topics: passion, toenails, improvisation, and a warning about the dangers of French novels. The last page is an advertisement for a companion volume, The Duties of Husbands, which appears to be permanently out of print. You close the book, more mystified than before. The marital manual has succeeded in one thing, making you feel that marriage is a labyrinth of rules, most of which you're probably already breaking. Still, you tuck it away on the nightstand, next to your hairpins and your sense of humor. As you and your husband exchange exasperated glances, you realize that the best way forward might be to ignore the manual entirely and trust your own instincts, assuming you can find them under all the linen. Because, at the end of the day, marriage is less about decoding ancient tomes and more about surviving, together, one confusing chapter at a time. You've heard rumors that marital relations could cause blindness, fainting, or somehow catching pneumonia. Science has left the building. Victorian England, an age of train, travel, empire, and robustly unscientific medical advice. As you ready yourself for your first night of marital adventure, you recall the many warnings whispered in dressing rooms and dark corners. Marital duty could make your hair fall out, your eyesight fail, or your lungs collapse like a souffle. According to the collective wisdom of maiden aunts, church pamphlets, and that one neighbor who claims to just know these things, intimacy is a dangerous activity best handled with prayer, herbal tea, and possibly a priest on standby. Your mother's most memorable advice was to avoid drafts at all costs. A sudden chill in the marital chamber, she intoned, can lead directly to the grave. This is delivered in the same tone she uses for scarlet fever and ill-advised hats. She also suggested that the mere act of removing your socks at the wrong moment could unbalance your humours and doom you to a lifetime of chills, snuffles, and moral decline. Other relatives had their own favourite fables. One whispered, with the gravity of an oracle, that too much enthusiasm could cause fainting fits, especially for women of delicate constitution. Some claimed a single, passionate embrace might bring on a case of the vapours so severe you'd have to be revived with smelling salts and a brisk walk in the fog. One pamphlet warned of nervous collapse if you enjoyed yourself too much, and another insisted you'd know you'd done it wrong if you felt happy afterwards. But the king of all Victorian myths is the terrifying prospect of blindness. You've heard it so often, it's become a sort of background noise. Remember cousin Beatrice? Never saw straight again after her wedding. No one seems to know exactly how this happens. Perhaps through a complex interaction of candlelight, anxiety, and the mysterious workings of marital bliss. But the threat is ever present. The only thing scarier than intimacy, it turns out, is being seen to know anything about it. Then there's the matter of what happens if you overdo it. Medical books of the time, written by men with large beards and even larger imaginations, warn about the risks of excessive conjugal union. You might develop nervous exhaustion, which sounds suspiciously like simply being tired, or hysterical laughter, which you're beginning to think is just what happens when you read too many Victorian advice columns. In extreme cases, the books say, you may suffer melancholia, shrunken gums, or a sudden, tragic inability to enjoy poetry. If all else fails, there's always the weather to blame. Victorian folklore insists that rain on your wedding night could dampen the marital spirit and give rise to chest complaints. Open windows? Immediate pneumonia. Closed windows? Suffocation by bad air. The ideal solution is to do nothing at all, ever, in a perfectly sealed room while wrapped in layers of wool and anxiety. Meanwhile, your husband is not immune to superstition. He's been warned to keep his feet warm, his hands to himself until the clock strikes midnight, and his mind on the Queen. No one seems able to agree whether passion should be spontaneous and thus perilous, or strictly scheduled and thus safe but potentially fatal to romance. So, as you lie in bed, listening to the distant whistle of a train and the closer sound of your own heart thumping in your ears, you try to make sense of it all. Are you courting disaster, or simply continuing a grand tradition of generational misinformation? Is romance really so perilous, or is it simply the Victorian way to make everything feel like a moral obstacle course? You decide to take a deep breath, pull up the itchy covers, and hope for the best. Blindness, fainting, or pneumonia, be damned. If nothing else, you'll have survived your first night in the world's most overprotected era, where love is a leap of faith, and every marital myth is just another story to laugh about in the morning. Every awkward sound, every nervous laugh, every question of, is this normal? It's all amplified by centuries of repressed Victorian anxiety. You thought you were prepared for awkwardness. After all, you've survived months of chaperone courtship, dinners with more cutlery than sense, and dancing the quadrille while praying not to step on your partner's feet. But nothing compares to the excruciating ballet of your first night alone together, when the entire weight of social expectation presses down like a pile of damp wool blankets. The room itself is a stage set for self-consciousness, candlelight flickering just enough to make every shadow dramatic, the heavy velvet curtains muffling sounds but somehow amplifying your own heartbeat, and the wedding bed creaking a warning at every movement. You and your husband trade anxious glances, each silently praying the other will make the first move, or, ideally, that you'll both be struck by a sudden and merciful sleep. Conversation falters, picks up again, and then falls off a cliff. Lovely weather for October, he offers, as though you're at a garden party and not wedged together on a horsehair mattress. You reply with equal brilliance. Yes, very seasonal, and marvel at how your vocabulary has shrunk to the size of a buttonhole. Even breathing feels complicated, especially when your corset hasn't quite released its hold and you're not sure whether the next deep inhale will be interpreted as excitement or a distress signal. The rituals of Victorian modesty hover over every action. Each time you try to untangle another piece of lace or fumble with an unfamiliar button, you're hyper-aware of how your every gesture might be read by generations of ancestors silently judging from the wallpaper. You remember all those stern warnings from etiquette books and mothers. Never reveal too much ankle, never initiate, never, ever laugh out loud in the bedroom. It's as if showing joy is considered a medical risk, best avoided in favor of dignified restraint and politely stifled yawns. The real trouble begins when you try to undress. Petticoats tangle, chemises twist, and your undergarments have united in their final act of resistance, refusing to budge. Every small struggle produces a squeak, a thump, or, worst of all, a muffled giggle that echoes through the chamber like a call for help. The idea of romance has long since been replaced by the much more pressing challenge of not falling over. You both attempt to help one another, which only makes things worse. He tries to unlace your corset, but ends up accidentally pulling your hair. You attempt to loosen his cravat and nearly choke him instead. At some point, a button flies off and skitters under the bed, its absence becoming the new focus of your combined embarrassment. The silence that follows is so heavy you half expect it to crack the ceiling plaster. Questions linger in the air, neither of you quite bold enough to ask them outright. Is this how it's supposed to go? Did anyone else have this much trouble? Are we going to get in trouble with the Queen for laughing? But the truth is, nobody told you what to expect, not really. Every friend's advice was whispered behind a hand, every marital manual more cryptic than the last. Now, in the semi-darkness, you realize that everyone before you has probably gone through this exact same awkward farce and survived. Eventually, embarrassment transforms into a kind of camaraderie. You catch each other's eye and start to laugh, quietly at first, then so hard you can barely breathe. The ice is broken, the spell of awkwardness lifting just enough for you to realize that, if nothing else, at least you're in this together. The old anxieties linger, but they've lost their power. As you finally settle beneath the covers, you discover that the secret to surviving a Victorian wedding night isn't perfect poise or silent suffering. It's the ability to laugh at yourself, at each other, and at the impossibly high bar set by centuries of anxious ancestors. In the end, love grows in the cracks of embarrassment, blooming best when you let the awkwardness in. The fire has gone out, the sheets are cold, and the windows are drafty. Romantic heat? More like mild hypothermia. You would think a Victorian bridal suite would be a sanctuary of warmth and coziness. But reality bites, usually in the form of a draft through a window that was last sealed properly in 1824. There's an impressive marble fireplace, but the fire sputtered out hours ago and now serves only as a decorative tomb for last week's ashes. You glance longingly at it, wishing someone would bring back a few coals. Instead, you have 3 extra blankets, none of which actually cover your feet at the same time. The bed itself, grand and imposing by daylight, has become a tundra at night. The sheets, stiff with starch, feel like chilled parchment. You pull the covers up to your chin, only to discover that cold air still finds its way in, snaking around your ankles and sending shivers up your spine. You and your husband huddle together, not so much for romance, but as a desperate bid for survival. Your nightwear does little to help. Flannel might sound cozy, but Victorian nightgowns are designed for modesty, not warmth. Your toes are icy, your nose is colder, and at some point you consider wrapping your feet in the drapes. The lace-edged pillowcase is freezing against your cheek, and every time you move, the bed creaks, releasing a fresh burst of cold from the depths below. It's as if you're sleeping on the world's largest icebox, carefully disguised with itchy embroidery. Outside, the wind moans through the ill-fitting window panes, rattling them in their frames and threatening to whisk away what little dignity you have left. You can hear the rain pattering on the roof, or is it sleet? Either way, the night is full of the sounds of a haunted manor house settling for a long, frosty siege. Victorian heating is less central and more localized wishful thinking. There might be a stoneware hot water bottle tucked under the blankets, but by now it's gone from pleasantly toasty to the temperature of a used teacup. You press your feet against it anyway, grateful for even a hint of warmth. Meanwhile, your husband attempts to stoke the embers in the hearth, but only succeeds in creating a smoke screen thick enough to make you both cough and water at the eyes. You try to remember all the old family advice. "Just keep moving," one aunt declared. "Layers, dear, layers," another advised. But there's only so much layering you can do before you resemble a very confused snowman. At one point, you debate whether it would be less scandalous to simply wear your woolen day shawl to bed and be done with it. The room doesn't just feel cold, it looks cold. The candlelight does nothing to warm the atmosphere. If anything, it casts blue shadows and makes the frost creeping across the windows glimmer ominously. You imagine icicles forming on the canopy and half expect to wake up to a layer of rime on the bedspread. Victorian poets wrote about passion heating the night, but you suspect most of them kept a secret flask of brandy under the mattress. Eventually, you and your husband reach a silent agreement. Forget modesty, forget the decorum. You end up curled together in the smallest patch of shared body heat you can manage, bundled up like two Victorian sardines. Romantic, it is not. Necessary, absolutely. As you finally begin to drift off, you realize the cold is just another absurd hurdle in this grand, bewildering tradition. Someday, you'll look back and laugh, probably from the warmth of a house with actual radiators. For now, you count your blessings, your shivers, and the hope that at least the in-laws can't hear your teeth chattering. In Victorian England, love might not always warm the heart, but it does a passable job as an emergency heat source. Your first conversation as a married couple consists mainly of apologies, weather updates, and speculation about the local dairy prices. It's a strange thing being newly married in Victorian England, especially when you're lying side by side in the world's coldest bed, wrapped up in more lace and starch than a laundry basket, searching for the perfect thing to say. The grand romance, promised by poets and penny novels, is nowhere to be found. Instead, you both glance at the ceiling, the candle flickers, and you begin your married life with the safest topic you can think of: the weather. Remarkably chilly for this time of year, he ventures, tugging the covers higher. You nod, agreeing solemnly as if you're on a secret committee for climate affairs. Yes, very damp. The fog was particularly persistent this morning. The conversation stalls as you both contemplate the local barometer and what it might mean for tomorrow's breakfast. A long silence follows, filled only by the wind rattling the window and the bed's regular symphony of creaks. You both sense that this is supposed to be the moment for whispering sweet nothings, but neither of you has been given a script. Instead, you try a different tactic. "Do you suppose the price of butter will go up this winter?" you ask, which, under the circumstances, is far more risque than anything in the marital manual. He perks up at this, relieved. Dairy prices, it seems, are safer than feelings. He confesses that his Uncle Arthur once tried to corner the cheese market, only to end up with 24 wheels of unwanted Stilton and a lifelong distrust of dairy traders. This sparks a 10-minute exchange on the relative merits of various milkmaids, local cows, and the alarming rumour that Mrs. Pritchard's goat has started eating the neighbour's laundry again. Gradually, the conversation loosens. He asks if you have a favourite jam, and you discover a mutual love of blackcurrant. You compare notes on terrible school teachers, childhood fevers, and which relatives are most likely to fall asleep in church. At one point, you both try to count how many children your combined families have produced, but lose track somewhere after cousin Ethelred, the one with the unusually long arms. When the silence returns, it's less awkward and more companionable. You find yourselves giggling quietly at the absurdity of it all. The wedding, the bed, the endless advice. "Did your mother warn you about marital duties?" you ask. He blushes and admits that all he got was a mumbled instruction about patience and a pamphlet that mostly talked about how to fold napkins correctly. You share your own cryptic advice, and the two of you bond over how little either of you actually understands about what's expected. It's oddly comforting, knowing you're both just improvising, fumbling your way through Victorian matrimony without a proper manual, unless you count the one left on the nightstand, which, as you both agree, is mostly useful for pressing flowers or propping up wobbly furniture. Outside, the wind gusts louder, and a branch taps against the window like an impatient aunt. The candle burns lower, the shadows grow softer, and the room's chill fades just a little with every shared confession. Somehow, your first real marital intimacy is built not on passion, but on small talk and shy laughter. Eventually, as the night deepens, you both drift into sleep mid-sentence, him wondering if it will snow by Sunday, you speculating on whether the cat is to blame for the missing butter. And in this cozy, ridiculous, and deeply human exchange, you discover the true secret to a happy Victorian marriage. If you can laugh about dairy prices on your wedding night, you'll probably be just fine. Breakfast with the family is a formal, silent event. Everyone knows, nobody says a word, and the toast tastes of judgment. You wake up groggy, hair in a wild Victorian sculpture, and realize that, against all odds, you survived your wedding night. Unfortunately, survival comes with a new challenge. Facing the family at breakfast, you stare at your reflection, hoping to summon a mask of dignity, but all you see is the faint outline of lace on your cheek and a single hairpin clinging to your eyebrow for dear life. You dress in a hurry, wrangling your petticoats into submission and smoothing your hair as best you can. There is no time for real breakfast or a hot cup of tea, just a few moments to steel yourself against the oncoming parade of polite inquiry and silent, all-knowing glances. The corridor is full of creaking floorboards and muffled voices. Every step echoes like a drum roll announcing your arrival. At the bottom of the stairs, you're met by the housemaid, who offers a curtsy and a sly smile. "Good morning, madam," she says, as if nothing at all is out of the ordinary. She's been waiting for this moment for months. The cook peeks from the kitchen, grinning like a Cheshire cat. You catch a glimpse of your new husband, equally sheepish, clutching a handkerchief and avoiding all eye contact. You enter the breakfast room and it's a tableau of forced serenity. Your mother-in-law presides at the head of the table, stoic as a marble statue, clutching her teacup with white-knuckled grace. Your father-in-law ruffles his newspaper but never actually reads it. Several aunts hover nearby, arranged in a formation that blocks any chance of a strategic retreat. The meal begins in total silence, except for the gentle clink of cutlery and the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock. The toast is burned, the eggs are cold, and the coffee tastes of awkwardness and over-roasted beans. Nobody comments. Nobody needs to. Every raised eyebrow, every pursed lip is a carefully coded message. We know what happened, or rather, what didn't happen, or what might have happened. If only the housemaid hadn't come in with extra towels at just the wrong moment. You and your husband exchange quick glances across the table, both trying to suppress nervous giggles. Your mind races with questions. Do they expect a status update? Will there be a quiz on marital harmony before noon? If you spill your tea, will someone interpret it as a sign? You butter your toast with the precision of a surgeon, determined not to make a sound. There is always one relative, an aunt, never married, who attempts a thinly veiled interrogation. "Did you sleep well, dear?" she asks, peering at you over her spectacles. You nod and manage a dignified, "Thank you, Aunt Mildred." She raises an eyebrow but says nothing more. Another aunt coughs gently, clearly hoping for a dramatic confession or at least a slip of the tongue. The family dog, meanwhile, is the only creature unbothered by protocol. He sits at your feet, wagging his tail and occasionally nudging your slipper, the picture of unconditional support. If only he could field questions on your behalf. As the meal winds down, your husband finally speaks. "Lovely weather today," he offers, and everyone leaps on the safe topic with relief. Rain, crops, and the church bazaar are discussed in excruciating detail, and you are both allowed to finish your toast in peace. You escape the table feeling lighter than you did the night before. The ordeal is over. You've faced the walk of slightly more shame and lived to tell the tale. And as you slip out into the fresh morning air, you realize that, in the end, the greatest relief of Victorian marriage is simply surviving breakfast, judgmental toast and all. You're both desperate to use the chamber pot, but unsure how to coordinate it. Victorian romance reaches its pinnacle. The elegant rituals of the wedding day have faded into the background, and now you face the true test of marital compatibility. Who will brave the chamber pot first? It sits in the shadowy corner of the room, discreetly covered by a frilly lid, a porcelain sentinel quietly mocking the pretense of romance. For all the poets ever wrote about passion, none ever tackled the logistics of Victorian plumbing, or lack thereof. You and your husband exchange silent glances, each hoping the other will be bold and end the standoff. The housemaid has, of course, left you with a perfunctory. "It's been freshly washed, madam," which is hardly the blessing it sounds like. In fact, it's more of a curse, because now you must face the full awkwardness of using the world's least private bathroom, in a room that echoes like a cathedral. You try to recall all the etiquette books, but, strangely, none of them include a section titled "How to be graceful when you really have to go." The best you can hope for is not to drop the lid, or worse, lose your balance and create a new family legend for generations to whisper about. The chamber pot dilemma quickly becomes a study in Victorian manners and marital negotiation. You consider just declaring, "I'll go first," but the words stick in your throat. Instead, you busy yourself rearranging the pillows, fiddling with your hair, and pretending to be deeply engrossed in the pattern on the wallpaper. Your husband, for his part, is examining a decorative plate as if it might reveal the secrets of the universe, or at least the secret to polite bathroom scheduling. Eventually, you can't wait any longer. You clear your throat and make a valiant attempt at subtlety. "I think I shall, freshen up." He nods, gallantly, and offers to inspect the fire, turning his back with the solemnity of a man defending national honor. You approach the chamber pot with the dignity of a queen and the nervousness of a contestant in a particularly undignified game show. Of course, there is no getting around the fact that every sound, every rustle of linen, will be noted and quietly filed away in the marital memory bank. The pot itself is cold and unwelcoming. You try to be as silent as possible, but the porcelain has other ideas. The echo is formidable. If you were hoping to be discreet, you have underestimated the chamber pot's sense of drama. When you finish, there's an awkward shuffling as you return the lid, and attempt to act as though nothing at all has happened. You rejoin your husband, who is valiantly poking at embers that do not need poking. Now it's his turn. He hesitates, but chivalry and necessity win out. You return the favor, examining the lace on the pillowcase with an intensity rarely seen outside scientific laboratories. Once the ordeal is over, you both let out a breath and collapse onto the bed, more relieved than you expected. The chamber pot, as it turns out, is the great equalizer of Victorian romance. You may have fumbled through your vows and tangled in your corset, but at least now you have survived the least glamorous of wedding night milestones together. Somehow, the shared discomfort breaks the last of the tension. You laugh, quietly at first, then helplessly, because there's nothing left to do. This is married life, in all its unscripted, undignified glory. As you snuggle under the covers, you agree without words. If you can coordinate the chamber pot, you can handle anything the Victorian era throws at you. And perhaps, in its own strange way, that's as romantic as it gets. By noon, the entire village knows whether your night was a success. Even the butcher's cat is in on the news. The sun isn't even high, but the news has already travelled faster than a telegram, carried on whispers, winks, and the relentless curiosity of every living soul within 5 miles. You emerge from the house, blinking into the morning light, thinking perhaps you can slip out for a breath of fresh air or a quiet stroll. Wishful thinking. The moment you set foot on the gravel, Mrs. Jenkins from next door is at her window, watering her geraniums for the third time today, eyes sharp as bayonets. The gossip machine has whirred to life, oiled by aunts, stoked by servants, and powered by people whose only source of entertainment is the intimate drama of others. The housemaid's cousin's best friend's milkman's wife is already at the market with her theory on how things went. Apparently, the presence or absence of a certain nightgown on the clothesline is a coded message to the town. No one actually knows the code, but that doesn't stop anyone from pretending. You walk to the bakery and feel the weight of 100 subtle glances. Mrs. Withers, who sells buns with a side of unsolicited advice, gives you a sly nod and says, "Hope you found last night restful, dear." You mumble something about the weather and escape with your bread, but not your dignity. The grocer asks after your young man, and even the postmaster winks, as if he's been reading your mail. Children stop their skipping rope to stare, dogs wag extra hard, and the vicar offers a cryptic, "Congratulations on your new beginnings." You can almost hear the village bulletin being written in real time. Page 1, the wedding night. There are already several versions of what happened, none of them remotely accurate, all of them far more dramatic than the truth. If only they knew the highlight of the evening was a fierce battle with a stubborn corset and the world's least romantic chamber pot. Your new husband does not fare better. At the pub, he's greeted with hearty backslaps and coded questions. "Sleep well? You'll be needing your strength for the harvest, eh?" There are toasts, jokes, and, if he's unlucky, a few knowing songs. Any sign of embarrassment is instantly interpreted as either confirmation or denial of something scandalous, depending on who is telling the story. Even the local animals get in on the action. The butcher's cat, who has never once acknowledged your existence, now sits on the wall outside your window, watching your every move with the knowing gaze of a furry village elder. He's seen it all and probably knows more than the vicar and Mrs. Jenkins put together. News travels up and down the high street, into the shop, out to the fields, and back again by tea time. No detail is too small. Did the maid change the linens this morning? Did the baker see a certain look on your face? Did the postman notice you left your gloves behind? Every mundane detail is grist for the rumour mill, spun into a tale that will grow with every telling. The story of your night will outlive your actual marriage. You begin to see the funny side. There's a certain camaraderie in surviving this communal rite of passage. Every married woman in the village has done her time under the microscope, and every bachelor and biddy will too. You realise that gossip is simply the background noise of Victorian life, relentless, absurd, and as much a part of marriage as wedding cake and uncomfortable shoes. So you walk a little taller, meet the baker's wink with a grin, and learn to wave at the butcher's cat. After all, if everyone's going to talk, you might as well give them something to talk about, like your new skill for surviving the Victorian surveillance state, one raised eyebrow at a time. You've been warned that babies come from God's will and not thinking too hard about it. Practical advice is nowhere to be found. You sit at the breakfast table, sipping weak tea, and contemplate the vast chasm between what you know and what you actually need to know. Babies, it seems, are the inevitable result of matrimony, like dust on the piano or a surplus of doilies. When you timidly asked your mother about the logistics of family planning, she looked at you with the gentle horror reserved for people who ask questions in church and replied, "Just be grateful for what the Lord provides." Dear. As for your aunts, they recommend vague notions of rest and moderation, as though avoiding pregnancy was simply a matter of having a nap and not making too much noise. If you're lucky, someone slips you a crumpled pamphlet from the continent, written in a mix of French, Latin, and codes that might actually be directions for making soup. It mentions marital intervals, timely withdrawal, and certain powders which can be purchased from a man in an alley who may or may not also sell leeches. Reading it feels dangerous, like dabbling in alchemy or considering a career on the stage. For most Victorian women, birth control is a cross between a divine mystery and an ongoing game of charades. You've heard rumours about special ladies' devices, but no one will describe them. let alone show you where to buy one. The bravest among your acquaintances whisper about sponges soaked in vinegar or silk French letters available for gentlemen, provided they're willing to face the judgmental glare of every pharmacist in town. Even then, there's no guarantee anyone knows how they're actually used, and the instructions are written in such genteel euphemisms that they may as well be ancient runes. Your husband, meanwhile, has been told by his uncle, a man who considers himself a worldly expert after 3 visits to Paris, that the best way to avoid a large family is to think cold thoughts and get up early in the morning. What this means in practice is anyone's guess. You're both left to experiment with a combination of superstition, wishful thinking, and the vague hope that if you just avoid looking each other in the eye after sundown, you'll somehow dodge the stork. Science is of little comfort. The family doctor, when pressed, will only cough awkwardly and mutter something about natural consequences. Medical books, when they mention contraception at all, describe it as unreliable, unladylike, and likely to bring about fits of melancholy, a decline in morals, or at best, damp sheets. Instead, there are endless treatises on the dangers of overexcitement and why too much enthusiasm is the root of both national decline and personal tragedy. It's little wonder, then, that Victorian birth control is less a science and more a social lottery. Some couples become accidental parents in rapid succession, blessed with enough children to populate their own cricket team. Others, through a combination of timing, luck, and sheer terror, remain childless and are pitied or suspected of being not quite right. Every missed period brings a fresh round of speculation, whispered advice, and strong tea. You develop strategies. Perhaps you try the separate beds approach, a favourite among the upper classes. Maybe you invest in herbal remedies, pennyroyal, Queen Anne's lace, and the ever-popular cup of strong gin, none of which are even remotely effective, but all are enthusiastically recommended by your friends. In the end, you resign yourself to fate, prayer, and the occasional desperate hope that Queen Victoria herself might invent something more reliable. In the grand game of Victorian birth control, everyone is guessing, everyone is anxious, and no one really knows the rules. It's a time of lace curtains, coded warnings, and polite confusion, a world where God's will is both an explanation and an excuse for why every family portrait contains more children than chairs. If nothing else, at least you're not alone in your bewilderment. In Victorian England, reproduction is a community event, and the whole village is in on the gamble. If anything goes even slightly awry, someone fetches the family doctor, who arrives with smelling salts and zero bedside manner. It starts, innocently enough. Maybe you've caught your heel in your petticoat, tripped over a stray bed slipper, or simply laughed too hard and set off a fit of hiccups. Perhaps you fainted, an understandable reaction to a night spent in a room colder than an icebox with a mattress that sounds like a flock of geese with every movement. Or maybe the only thing wrong is that you were caught clutching your side in an effort to loosen your corset, your face a lovely shade of Victorian puce. Either way, in a household like this, no minor incident goes unnoticed. All it takes is one concerned aunt, one hovering housemaid, or one sibling determined to win the medal for most helpful relative. Within minutes, the family is in a flurry, someone is dispatched with a candle, and the doctor is summoned with an urgency usually reserved for outbreaks of the plague. The family doctor is a fixture in every respectable Victorian household, a man who knows everyone's secrets, has treated everything from chilblains to female hysteria, and believes strongly in the restorative power of brandy and brisk walks. He is immune to embarrassment, resistant to explanation, and operates on the principle that a patient's dignity is optional. He arrives within minutes, shoes muddy, waistcoat askew, medical bag swinging, and an expression that hovers between boredom and mild suspicion. His entrance is never subtle. He sweeps into the room, sniffing the air for the telltale scent of calamity, and immediately inquires, "Where's the patient?" Everyone gestures to you, the unfortunate newlywed, still tangled in a blanket, and blushing furiously. He peers at you over his spectacles, mutters something about modern marriages, and demands a report. You manage a shaky, just a bit of light-headedness, but your mother-in-law insists you collapse dramatically, possibly due to excitement, nerves, or romantic overexertion. Out come the smelling salts, waved under your nose with the enthusiasm of a magician revealing a rabbit. "Deep breaths, my dear," he orders, as if deep breathing will cure anything from embarrassment to pneumonia. The whole family leans in, eager for a diagnosis, preferably something dramatic, but nothing so serious that it will overshadow tomorrow's luncheon. He takes your pulse, feels your forehead, and inquires after the state of your bowels. Victorian medicine is obsessed with digestion. No ailment is so minor that it cannot be traced back to a sluggish liver or a dinner roll consumed out of turn. For good measure, he prescribes a tonic, a mysterious mixture that tastes like rusty spoons and regret, and perhaps a restorative tea, brewed with enough brandy to send you back to bed with a pleasant buzz. Your husband, standing nervously in the corner, receives a quick checkup as well. The doctor suggests he take things slowly and recommends a few evenings of separate beds, just in case. The diagnosis is always the same: nerves, overexcitement, or an excess of enthusiasm. The doctor makes a note in his ledger, more interested in your symptoms than your privacy, then issues advice so vague it could apply to a broken leg or a broken heart. Plenty of rest, keep the fire going, and try not to think too much. The visit ends as abruptly as it began. The doctor pockets his fee, pockets the remaining smelling salts, and sweeps out the door, leaving you feeling equal parts embarrassed, relieved, and grateful that he didn't summon the local vicar as well. The family disperses, muttering about weak constitutions and the dangers of overexertion, while you crawl gratefully under the covers, wishing for nothing more than a moment's peace. In Victorian England, a visit from the doctor is as much a performance as the wedding itself, a ritual that turns the most minor mishap into a story for future generations. And as you finally drift off, you find a bit of comfort in the knowledge that, if nothing else, your marriage has already produced one thing: excellent material for village gossip. The room smells of lavender, fear, sweat, and mothballs. It's the signature fragrance of Victorian romance. The moment you enter the bridal suite, you're enveloped by an aroma that is equal parts reassuring and suspicious. The lavender is everywhere, sprigs tucked into dresser drawers, sachets hidden under pillows, and a liberal dusting of potpourri scattered like confetti on every flat surface. Lavender, you're told, wards off evil spirits, nervousness, and most importantly, the persistent odors of living in a house without plumbing. Then comes the unmistakable, pungent note of mothballs. Your great-aunt, self-proclaimed expert on domestic management, personally added extra to the wardrobe for luck. The result is a smell that lands somewhere between ancient linen closet and chemical weapon. You open the armoire for your nightgown, and the fumes hit you like a cautionary tale. If you find yourself tearing up, you can claim its sentiment. If anyone asks, it's just the mothballs. The air is thick, with the layered residue of centuries of anxious couples. There's the sharp tang of perspiration, your own and possibly a ghostly chorus of wedding nights past. You wonder how many nervous brides before you have contributed to the collective bouquet, each leaving a signature trace behind in the upholstery. The bedsheets, starched to a near-crackling crispness, exude a faint whiff of laundry soap that can never quite overpower the underlying, stubborn scent of old wood and candle wax. As you move through the room, the fragrances change with every step. Near the fireplace, it's ashes and soot, a reminder that romantic heat is mostly theoretical. By the window, a gentle draught stirs the scent of damp curtains and whatever flowers the housemaid managed to salvage from the garden. They droop in their vase, emitting a faint odor of resignation and last-ditch hope. Of course, beneath it all is the perfume of fear, raw, adrenalized, unmistakably human. Victorian anxiety comes in waves, mixing with every breath. Your pulse races, your palms sweat, and your heart pounds loud enough to compete with the ticking clock. The room amplifies your nerves, absorbing them into the decor. Floral wallpaper that once promised serenity now seems to vibrate with barely contained tension. Your new husband isn't faring much better. He enters, takes a deep sniff, and immediately looks as if he's been hit by a potent cocktail of nostalgia and apprehension. His cologne, applied in hopeful excess, tries valiantly to assert itself, but only succeeds in adding another confusing note to the room's symphony. Now it's lavender, mothballs, sweat, and the unmistakable aroma of Gentleman's Reserve No. 3, with undertones of disappointment and subtle panic. You both try to normalize things. You mention the lavender. He mentions the mothballs. He jokes that at least the room won't be infested with moths, and you laugh, grateful for any humor to cut through the tension. Every nervous movement adds something new to the air. The scent of hair pomade, the staleness of a long day spent in formal clothes, and the faint, ever-present perfume of polished furniture and melting candle wax. Eventually, as the hour grows late and your nerves begin to settle, you find the scents less alarming. There's a certain comfort in the absurdity, like a crowded bouquet, everything jumbled and clashing, but undeniably real. The air of expectation, the nervous sweat, the overwhelming lavender, these are the invisible witnesses to your first night as a married couple. As you finally climb into bed, the scents swirl together in one last anxious gasp. You pull the covers tight, breathe in, and realize the fragrance of matrimony is complicated, contradictory, and just a little bit ridiculous. Much like marriage itself. And if you can learn to laugh about it, you're already ahead of the game, perfumed, moth-proof, and as ready as you'll ever be. Every aunt in your life has advice, and all of it is terrible. Most of it involves pie, silence, or embroidery. Even before the wedding day, the warnings and wisdom start trickling in, usually over tea, sometimes with a squeeze of the hand, and always with a sigh that could extinguish a candle. "Listen to me, dear," says Aunt Mildred, the undisputed champion of marital pessimism. "The secret to a long marriage is simple. Keep a good pie recipe, never show all your emotions, and for heaven's sake, take up something quiet like embroidery. Keeps the hands busy and the mind elsewhere." You nod, trying not to ask elsewhere from what. The advice flows freely, each bit more baffling than the last. Aunt Edna, who has not spoken to Uncle Geoffrey since the Crimean War, insists that the way to a happy home is to never, under any circumstances, let your husband see you without a ribbon in your hair. "He'll lose all respect for you," she declares, glaring at your practical braid as though it were a political statement. Aunt Beatrice offers the strategy of strategic silence. If in doubt, say nothing. If not in doubt, say even less. You wonder how this applies to dinner conversations or the logistics of the chamber pot. But she just sips her tea and stares into the middle distance, perhaps reviewing her own decades of silent endurance. The younger aunts, those freshly disillusioned by the realities of marital compromise, suggest pie, but only as a weapon. If you must fight, bake something first. A good pie can cushion any argument, at least for as long as there are leftovers. You imagine your future kitchen, stacked with pastries, a fortress against disappointment. Then come the stories, tales of romantic disaster, confusion, and comedic failure. Aunt Letitia recounts her wedding night, during which Uncle Albert mistook the chamber pot for a decorative vase. Marriage, dear, is all about forgiveness and buying new vases. She then insists you never embroider your husband's initials on anything. It tempts fate, and men do not need to be reminded where their socks belong. Perhaps most confusing is the advice on intimacy, usually whispered after a glass or two of sherry. "Just close your eyes and think of anything else," says Aunt Prudence, trailing off into a long monologue about the relative merits of daisies over roses and whether one should ever permit a husband to see her eating cheese. Cheese, she confides, is for widows and French women. The undercurrent of all this advice is clear. Lower your expectations. Happiness is for the young and the newly engaged, Aunt Mildred sighs. But contentment is found in quiet routines, matching tea sets, and keeping your opinions about the vicar's sermons to yourself. Some aunts advocate relentless busyness. If you keep your hands full with embroidery, knitting, or arranging flowers, there is less time to dwell on any emotional shortcomings. Idle hands are the devil's playthings, they warn. Idle minds, even more so. Not that you're allowed to question this wisdom. If you dare suggest that marriage might be about partnership or, heaven forbid, joy, the entire drawing room falls silent, save for the sound of someone aggressively darning a sock. The collective belief seems to be that the only way to survive is to master the art of not making a fuss. Trouble, after all, is for the lower classes and the characters in serialized novels. So, as you set out on your own marital journey, you carry these pearls of wisdom, strung together with equal parts horror and hilarity. Pie for peacemaking, silence for self-preservation, embroidery for sanity. If nothing else, the aunt's advice has one thing right. Laughter, not lace, is your greatest ally. Because the real secret to surviving marriage, as every unhappily married aunt surely knows, is learning to find joy in the absurdity and always keeping a pie on standby. Eventually, you and your husband might find comfort, laughter, or at least a mutual understanding about how to untangle corset strings without causing injury. Progress is slow, but at least nobody's fainted today. No one tells you that the most intimate moments of a Victorian marriage don't arrive on your wedding night in a flurry of passion and perfectly arranged lace. Instead, intimacy tiptoes in quietly, sometime after the panic, the confusion, and the desperate battle with 14 layers of undergarments. It settles in over days and weeks, often at the most unglamorous times, like when your husband finally learns the right angle to unhook a corset without nearly braining you with a flying hairpin. At first, everything feels like a performance. You both shuffle around each other, apologizing for the smallest things. "Sorry, did I step on your skirt? I didn't mean to elbow you in the ear. That button was already loose, I swear." The etiquette books prepared you for everything except the actual person in front of you, with his sheepish grins, mismatched socks, and the ability to fall asleep anywhere, at any time, on any surface. The initial days are a gauntlet of minor mishaps. There's the time you both try to occupy the washstand at once, elbowing each other and splashing water everywhere. Or when he helps you brush your hair and ends up with a comb hopelessly entangled, both of you in stitches over the resulting bird's nest. Every small disaster is another step away from awkwardness and towards something approaching real comfort. You learn each other's routines in the soft, slow rhythm of shared space. You come to expect his tendency to whistle while shaving, or his habit of reciting half-remembered lines of poetry before bed. He discovers that you prefer tea first thing in the morning, and that you always tuck your feet up to keep them warm. There are small kindnesses, an extra blanket on cold nights, a secret stash of biscuits in the nightstand drawer, and, eventually, inside jokes that would make your aunts faint dead away. Intimacy, you realize, isn't the product of perfectly timed romance, but of 1,000 small moments of kindness and absurdity. It's the ability to laugh at the unglamorous bits, like when the chamber pot tips over, or the family dog bursts into the room at an inopportune moment, or when one of you falls asleep mid-conversation with a mouthful of crumbs. It's the shared knowledge that, yes, the bed is lumpy and the house is freezing, but at least you're both equally cold. You find yourselves talking late into the night, voices muffled by blankets, swapping secrets and confessions that have nothing to do with marital duty or the expectations of the empire. You admit to your childhood fear of thunderstorms. He admits that he once fainted during a school play. You promise not to judge him for his off-key singing, and he swears not to laugh when you accidentally snore. These become the bricks of your own quiet foundation, a marriage built not on mystery, but on trust and genuine companionship. There are, of course, setbacks, the occasional bout of embarrassment, a return of the ever-watchful in-laws, or another skirmish with Victorian lingerie. But with each little struggle, you build resilience together. One day, you realize the prospect of sharing a chamber pot or helping with a stubborn button doesn't mortify you anymore. It's just another piece of life you navigate as a team. So, you move forward, awkward, uncertain, but always together. And as the days turn into months, you discover that the slow road to intimacy is the one with the best stories, the most laughter, and the surest sense that, through thick and thin, and at least 7 layers of petticoats, you are exactly where you belong. In the end, love in the Victorian age isn't swift or showy, but quietly stubborn, a gradual, gentle adventure with the person who knows how to find the end of your corset strings and, even better, makes you laugh while doing it. Before the wedding night, you are presented with a trousseau, a massive trunk packed with lace, linens, and mysterious objects no one has explained. Most of it is monogrammed. All of it is terrifying. You wonder if you're expected to use the silver-plated fish knife or just lie there and hope it's decorative. Victorian wedding tradition dictates that a respectable bride arrives at her new home with enough belongings to open a moderately successful department store. Your trousseau is the evidence of months of planning, sewing, and embroidery, primarily by your mother and every aunt within a 100-mile radius. It arrives before you do, wheeled into your new bedroom by 2 red-faced footmen who seem faintly haunted by the sheer weight of marital expectation and linen. The trunk itself is an heirloom, lined in faded velvet and smelling faintly of lavender, mothballs, and, possibly, regret. When you finally work up the nerve to open it, you are greeted by a veritable mountain of folded fabric, nightdresses with more ruffles than scents, chemises embroidered with your new initials, tablecloths, antimacassars, handkerchiefs, and enough towels to supply a small naval fleet. Each one is lovingly stitched, starched to within an inch of its life, and, because this is Victorian England, thoroughly documented in a little booklet that lists the purpose, washing instructions, and family anecdote associated with each. Then there's the bridal set. A collection of lace-trimmed nightwear that your mother swears is elegant and absolutely essential, but looks suspiciously like it was designed to repel any and all romantic intentions. Your new husband, upon seeing the quantity of lace, may briefly wonder if he's married a person or a walking doily. Tucked among the linens are the true mysteries of the trousseau. There are at least 3 objects whose purpose remains obscure: a silver hook, perhaps for buttoning shoes, a brush with bristles so stiff it could scour a cast-iron pan, a monogrammed sachet that's either for scenting clothes or for summoning polite ghosts. No one will explain these things, but you're expected to store them reverently. To lose a trousseau item is to invite 7 years of bad luck and the silent disapproval of every matron in the county. Then there's the flatware, a terrifying collection of engraved forks, fish knives, and sugar tongs. Etiquette books advise displaying these at appropriate moments, but offer little guidance on when, exactly, the need for a cake server shaped like a swan will arise in married life. You half suspect some of these items exist solely to test your composure when your mother-in-law drops by to help you settle in. Everything is monogrammed, of course. Your initials are everywhere, stitched into napkins, stamped on brushes, even engraved on a tiny silver thimble. It's as if someone wanted to make absolutely sure you never forgot your own name in a moment of crisis. You wonder if your husband's trousseau, if he had one, consisted of a single shaving brush and a vague sense of dread. Unpacking the trunk becomes a day-long ordeal. Each item is examined, placed in its proper drawer, and admired by any passing relative. Such fine work. Look at that edging. We haven't seen tatting like this since your grandmother's day. By the time you're done, you're convinced that the purpose of the trousseau is less about setting up housekeeping and more about giving your new family a conversational topic for the next 3 months. That night, surrounded by starched linen and monogrammed reminders of your own inadequacy, you wonder what any of this has to do with actual marriage. But as you wrap yourself in one of the endless embroidered shawls, you realize the trousseau, for all its absurdity, is a rite of passage, a physical symbol of hope, anxiety, and a fresh beginning. And if nothing else, at least you'll never run out of handkerchiefs. You're offered a pre-bedtime meal reputed to inspire passion, which, in Victorian England, means lukewarm oyster stew and a glass of celery water. Neither works. If anything, you're now less interested in romance and more interested in finding a toothbrush. The evening meal is a ritual all its own, carefully orchestrated by generations of aunties, housemaids, and the inevitable family cookbook with sections like suppers for marital success and soup to soothe the nervous bride. You sit at the edge of the bed, gazing warily at a tray carried in with great ceremony, a bowl of greyish oyster stew and a glass of celery water, sweating gently in the candlelight. It's presented as a kind of magical elixir, whispered about in the parlours of matrons as the key to a successful union. You're not convinced. The oysters are suspiciously rubbery, their milky broth giving off a scent best described as briny disappointment. The celery water, a pale green concoction, promises to invigorate the blood, but mostly tastes like what happens when you run out of ideas and start steeping salad. You take a polite sip and try to mask your wince behind the rim of your glass. Your husband is no braver, swirling his spoon absent-mindedly while making up small talk about what else? The price of oysters at market. Family tradition dictates that someone must comment on the aphrodisiacal powers of these foods. An elderly aunt once claimed she conceived twins after a particularly large helping of oyster pudding, though family history also notes she never spoke to her husband again after that. The lore is thick and contradictory. Celery stirs the passions, oysters awaken the senses, and cold custard is to be avoided for fear of apathy. You wonder who wrote these rules and whether they'd ever actually tasted any of these dishes. You do your best to be gracious. You eat a few spoonfuls, each more challenging than the last, and chase them with celery water, as if it might magically erase the memory. You and your husband exchange a look that says, "Shall we just pretend to be overcome by desire?" But really, all you want is a mint, or a full stomach, or possibly a time machine to a century with chocolate and central heating. Your appetite wanes long before your courage, and the oyster stew settles uncomfortably in your stomach, adding a layer of queasy tension to the already crowded room. The only passion being stirred is a desperate hope that someone has left a biscuit on the nightstand. You make a mental note to add emergency snacks to your trousseau for future reference. Your husband tries to lighten the mood. "I've read that celery is the secret to lasting romance," he says, but even he can't keep a straight face. You both dissolve into laughter, quiet at first, then uncontrollable, realizing together that, no matter how hard Victorian society tries, you simply can't manufacture chemistry with soup. The only thing truly awakened by the meal is a strong urge to brush your teeth and open a window. The lingering scent of oyster stew clings to the air, adding yet another confusing note to the room's ever-expanding bouquet of lavender, mothballs, and marital nerves. If you were hoping for an aphrodisiac, you'd have better luck with a slice of cold toast and a generous sense of humor. As you retire for the night, stomachs rumbling in a minor key, you take comfort in the small victory of surviving yet another Victorian tradition. The meal may not have inspired passion, but it has given you something better, a shared joke, a quiet conspiracy, and the sure knowledge that, in the grand scheme of things, love is not measured in oysters or celery soup. It's found in laughter, resilience, and the joy of knowing that neither of you will ever have to eat that meal again, at least not without a toothbrush close at hand. In your new bedroom, you notice a stuffed owl and a glassy-eyed squirrel staring down at the bed. You try to ignore them, but Victorian taste means every surface is occupied by something preserved and judging you. Nothing says romance like a moth-eaten badger lamp. No one warned you that matrimony would mean sharing your most intimate moments under the unblinking gaze of a dozen taxidermied animals. You suppose it's meant to be quaint, a testament to family history and the Victorian obsession with cataloguing the natural world. But right now, it's hard to find the sentimental charm in a parade of glassy eyes and oddly stiff tails. The squirrel is perched atop the dresser, forever clutching a nut with the grim determination of someone who's just overheard your entire conversation about chamber pots. The owl, wings frozen in an eternal mid-flap, peers down from the mantel as though weighing your worthiness as a newly minted spouse. You try to focus on anything else, the candlelight, the rumpled sheets, the delicate flowers on the wallpaper, but every time you move, there's a faint creak, a flicker of shadow, and suddenly it feels as though the menagerie is inching closer, silently scoring the evening's performance. Romance, in theory, should be private. In Victorian England, it's more of a public event, with audience participation from the local fauna stuffed for posterity. The pièce de résistance is the badger lamp, a family heirloom gifted by your husband's eccentric great-uncle, whose twin passions were electrification and things that once dug holes in the garden. The badger sits on the bedside table, looking less like a symbol of love and more like a warning from Mother Nature. The light bulb, too dim, too yellow, casts grotesque shadows across its snout so that when you catch it out of the corner of your eye, it looks like it's about to offer relationship advice. As you and your husband attempt a normal conversation, the presence of all this preserved wildlife becomes impossible to ignore. He tries to reassure you. They're just for luck, you know. My grandmother said the owl keeps nightmares away. You nod politely, hoping he doesn't notice you pulling the blanket up a little higher to block the squirrel's view. He admits, sheepishly, that the badger lamp gives him the creeps too, especially when the wind rattles the window and the owl's shadow stretches across the ceiling like an ominous omen. Victorian interiors, you quickly realize, are not designed for minimalism or comfort. Every inch of surface is packed with relics, pressed ferns under glass, seashells arranged like battle plans, and of course, endless tributes to departed pets. You find yourself wondering if the chair in the corner is truly velvet, or if it too started life in the forest. In a moment of nervous hilarity, you both start naming the animals. The owl becomes Lord Hootington, the squirrel is Lady Hazel, and the badger lamp, whose name you decide must be Sir Reginald, is solemnly appointed as chaperone for the evening. Laughter bubbles up, easing the worst of your nerves. You agree that if your marriage can withstand the scrutiny of this taxidermied tribunal, it will survive anything. Eventually, the absurdity of it all becomes its own kind of intimacy. With every sideways glance, every shared giggle, you knit together a story that will outlast the moth-eaten menagerie. The owl and the squirrel will still be judging tomorrow, but tonight, they've inadvertently helped you and your husband draw closer, if only in mutual bewilderment. As the candle sputters and the shadows grow longer, you decide that romance is not about the absence of witnesses, but about finding ways to laugh together, even under the gaze of Lord Hootington and Sir Reginald. Victorian love, it turns out, is a team sport, especially when half the team is stuffed and mounted. You've heard whispers about the infamous wedding sheet, a white linen with a suspicious hole in the middle, used in some households to maintain modesty. You're not sure if it's a real tradition or just a cruel prank. Either way, it's not improving your confidence. The legend of the wedding sheet floats through Victorian drawing rooms, whispered by aunties and friends with a sense of delicious horror. Some insist it's an old custom, proof of your virtue, a way to shield modesty, or perhaps just the result of someone being very confused about how laundry works. Others claim it's a myth invented to torment nervous brides and keep conversation lively during long embroidery circles. Still, as you unpack your trousseau, you can't help but search every folded linen for signs of sabotage. Your nerves are already stretched thin by corsets, in-laws, and the housemaid's barely veiled smirks. The last thing you need is to worry about accidentally reenacting a medieval ritual in front of a critical audience of taxidermied woodland creatures. The wedding sheet, supposedly spread between you and your new husband, with only a small opening for necessary business, is enough to make you question whether Victorian matrimony is actually an elaborate endurance test. You study your linens by candlelight. Is that hole in the corner from enthusiastic monogramming? Or have you stumbled upon the infamous artifact? Your husband, equally inexperienced, looks over your shoulder and asks, "What's this bit for?" Neither of you knows. The answer, you suspect, lies somewhere between awkward guesswork and the darker corners of the advice manual still sitting unopened on your nightstand. If you're bold, you might ask your mother for clarification. She turns pink and suggests you focus on the higher purpose of marriage before making a rapid exit and pretending to search for a lost hat pin. The housemaid, who knows everything, simply shrugs and mutters, "Families have their ways, don't they?" Which is both less and more information than you wanted. Some say the wedding sheet was invented by nuns or grandmothers with a vested interest in keeping things as awkward as possible. It might also be a relic of puritanical times, a way to ensure nothing unseemly happened even when the whole point of the exercise was, in fact, unseemliness. You and your husband try to joke about it, but it's hard to keep a straight face when contemplating the logistics of a romantic encounter conducted through what amounts to a starched linen letterbox. As you prepare for bed, you glance at the folded sheets and the suspiciously uniform linens. Do you use the special sheet and risk humiliation, or do you hide it under the mattress and hope no one checks? You choose the latter, tucking it away with the same urgency as hiding contraband. It's not clear if you've dodged tradition or missed out on a family rite of passage. Either way, you sleep easier knowing your night won't involve historical reenactment. The next morning, rumors circulate at breakfast. Aunt Mildred asks pointedly whether everything went according to custom. You simply smile and nod, too polite and too tired to ask which custom she means. Across the table, your husband nearly chokes on his toast. Later, you hear more versions of the story. The wedding sheet is only for aristocrats. It's an Irish thing. It's a joke played on nervous brides. It's a relic from a time when no one could admit they actually enjoyed themselves. You suspect the real tradition is simply keeping the next generation guessing. In the end, the wedding sheet becomes another part of the great Victorian marital mystery. One more absurdity to be endured, laughed about, and, eventually, turned into a story for your own children with embellishments. As you fold your linens, you're just glad to be in a marriage where the only holes in the bedding are the ones meant for your head and maybe, if you're lucky, a good night's sleep. So tonight, as you settle deeper under your blanket, your modern, clean, reliably comfortable blanket, maybe take a quiet breath for all the Victorian women who braved wedding nights that were less passion and more polite confusion. You've survived the ruffled gowns, the cryptic advice, the bed that sounded like a haunted violin, and the ever-watchful eyes of taxidermy squirrels. You've endured candlelit mysteries, chamber pots, and awkward silences so profound they're still echoing in the halls of English country houses. The bridal nerves, the blushing confusion, and the endless layers of taffeta. Somehow, it all became part of the great, weird tapestry of being human. Because history isn't just hardship, it's hope in the face of utter nonsense. It's people, anxious, hopeful, stubbornly optimistic, making do with superstition, secrecy, and just enough lavender to overpower the fear. Every woman who survived her wedding night, and every couple who managed to laugh about it in the end, reminds us how strange and resilient humans can be. So tonight, as you lie in your own room, with your own space, free of prying relatives and ghostly lace curtains, maybe give a quiet nod to your ancestors. They fumbled, blushed, and kept going, and they passed down, if nothing else, the noble tradition of surviving the truly bizarre. Sleep well. Tomorrow you'll wake up in the 21st century, where intimacy isn't arranged by your mother, and the scariest thing in your bedroom is probably just your phone's screen time report. Good night, and thank you for spending this peculiar, lovely evening in history with me. May your dreams be corset-free, your sheets comfortably holeless, and your sleep utterly peaceful.